It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is Investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com. Just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, if you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. Everything you hear Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio, you could find on the Opperman Report Patreon. The past week, I've been very busy. I've been putting up a lot of free stuff. We got the whole Trump indictment. We have that. We have the unedited version of the Devin Archer transcript before the House Republicans here. There's another version I posted first. It turns out it was an edited version from, I think it was Representative Comar's site page. But we got a hold of the unedited version. That's up there too as well. Plus the Maria Farmer complaint against the FBI. A lot of stuff in the free section too at Opperman Reports on Patreon. Our archives you can find for free at Spreaker.com and Apple Plays. Do a live show every Friday night, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Actually, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Time, but I don't know where the hell I am these days. Okay, so you can check that out too at Spreaker.com. There's a chat room, and you get an email notification whenever we put up new content. I'm very excited about our guest today, J Vance. He's got a podcast called Operation GCD. And you can find him too at operationgcd.com. He just brand new to Instagram. There you can see all his pictures of his meals, his dinners, and his food on Instagram. Probably that's to Operation GCD. And we're going to be talking today about the Idaho 4 murders, those college kids that got murdered in Idaho. The suspect under arrest right now is some kind of criminal defense major, and very suspicious circumstances around that case. Mr. J Vance, are you there?
Ed, greetings, sir. Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. And J Vance here, and I am the host of the Operation GCD podcast. That's Garbage Can Dude. It's my kind of smart aleck way of saying that I live in a garbage can world. But on my podcast, I bill it as a shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude, myself. And I like to aim to mash together comedy and conspiracy theory in an entertaining fashion and informative fashion. I like to kind of cover topics of secret societies and occult groups and other taboo topics in our current modern era of censorship.
Mm. Yeah, you were telling me off the air too that you're into those things with those I guess Native American mounds that are found around the country.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I've done a number of podcasts on various my podcasts and other various shows, like recent appearance. I did a couple of series I've been doing on the ancient burial mounds with the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and Mark Steves, the host over there, is very knowledgeable in the subject of mounds too. So we've both been kind of learning some new mound stuff from each other and diving into some of those topics. But yeah, it's a fascinating culture that used to exist here in America, and they left these burial mounds that have been existing for thousands of years in some instances, and it's quite a fascinating tale of the mound builders.
Well, real quick before we get into the Idaho 4 murders, these mounds, they have like one person buried in there or several. What's the story with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually a variety. It's kind of a sliding scale of sorts. So there are mounds with they've discovered simply one person buried in there, is similar to what we do with graves today, right? In our modern times. But other ones, yeah, there's been very ornately constructed, burial rituals at the base of these mounds with, upwards of a dozen skeletons, oftentimes in like a wheel fashion. So they would have like typically a giant human skeleton, 7 to 9 feet tall, has been recorded as the center of the wheel, and then about 12 skeletons as if they were spokes in a wheel around that skeleton. That's a very common trait amongst a lot of these burial mounds. But then there's also some of the burial mounds, according to the modern science folks in anthropology and ethnology and whatnot, they have concluded that some of these were sites for ritual human sacrifice. So there are different types of burial mounds for sure.
And these are all across the country, not just in one location.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it covers approximately 47 states. There's mounds in, and largely the concentration of the focus of the mounds were in the kind of the Mississippi Valley region, but specifically the oldest ones were out of Central Ohio to and kind of spreading out from there as if Central Ohio, Chillicothe, Ohio, was the bullseye for the oldest mound culture. That would be so it kind of spread out from there, but reached as far as Illinois, Indiana, that far. But there were different cultures in different times, but these were the ones that are the oldest ones. We're talking roughly 2,500, 3,000 years old.
I've been to, just telling you off the air, I've been to one of those mounds, and it's huge. They had to build staircases next to it. It's a huge, giant mound. How would they even pile the dirt that high, you wonder? But now, do we know what's in every single one of those mounds? Or we just once we've dug up a few of them, we just say, they're all like this?
Yeah, basically your ladder analysis there, yeah. But interesting. So which mound site did you go to? Was this Cahokia?
Yeah, I think it's in Tampa area.
Oh, Tampa. Okay,
yeah.
So they have some big platform mounds down there too. Okay.
Tampa, Bradenton, it could have been.
Yeah, no.
Sarasota, maybe. Yeah, it was around this area. Yeah.
No, that's definitely mound country. I mean, the Seminole tribe's still very prevalent down there, and I'm sure they're the ones that they're often attributed to these mounds today, and some of their ancestors may have certainly been involved, but I don't think it's the whole story of as far as who is the mound builders. They weren't just simply the ancestors of our modern tribes, because a lot of the modern tribes, they have gone through different variations of those tribes over centuries here in America.
Okay, we definitely have to have you come back and talk about that. Okay.
No, that'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. And the one you reminded me of in your explanation of the platform mound, there's one in East St. Louis, Illinois, and not Missouri, just right across the river though. And it's called the Cahokia complex of mounds, and it's one of the largest ones still remaining in America as far as the complexes go. This would have been more like the 1100s, 1200s time frame, supposedly, when these mounds were constructed. But the big one they have there is larger in size in total volume of contents of dirt and whatnot than the Great Pyramid of Giza. So
really?
these are yeah. I think it's got to beat by a small margin as far as the footprint, because it's almost like a tiered platform mound is what it looks like today. I mean, presumably it had larger platforms on top and raised higher than it does today. But yeah, I mean the actual footprint at the base of the mound is larger than the footprint there at the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, fascinating. We definitely have to have you come back about that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. That'd be great.
J Vance, okay, tell us about the Idaho 4 murders. It's these college kids that were all found dead, several of them in this college college apartment type of situation. Tell us the official story, and then tell us what you've dug up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, well, let me preface it by saying and try to alleviate some confusion amongst the folks listening to the show here today, Ed. That how do I get it going from one interest of ancient mounds to murder? But professionally speaking, I spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force military police, and then I have an education as well in grad and post-grad in criminal justice. So it is something that's interested me. I'm not exactly a true crime buff by any means or true crime podcaster, but professionally speaking, I've been involved in law enforcement and private detective in retirement as well from the Air Force. So these are subjects that interest me, and I occasionally talk about on my podcast. And the Idaho 4 one I found very intriguing from the beginning, probably much like everyone else did who initially saw some of those reports, because here it is a fairly sleepy college town, and in the essentially a very I wouldn't say rural, but not densely populated area of the United States, when you're talking the Washington-Idaho border over there, where the University of Idaho sits in Moscow, Idaho, and 5 miles across the border is in Pullman, Washington, is Washington State University. And both of these universities play into this whole saga here with the Idaho 4 quadruple homicide that occurred on the morning of November 13th, 2022. And it seemed like it was a very shocking thing across all media outlets and internationally. I mean, it grabbed some international attention. I recall seeing some news clips in a foreign language out of, I believe it was either Indonesia or Malaysia. I'm not up to speed on my island nations of the South Pacific there, but they were covering this case. So I mean, it really did grab international headlines when four University of Idaho college students were murdered in their home, and the investigation almost seemed like a cold case immediately, the way some of the law enforcement authorities were handling it, because I think that was the other factor that really grasped. Not only was it a tragic event, but then there was the aftermath of the immediate reaction to the event, and I think the culmination of those two factors that kind of grabbed international attention, if you will.
Yeah, it was odd that the investigators were very tight-lipped, and then also too there were survivors in the homes where these silent murders took place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. There were survivors in the home, and the silent murders took place, and the way and to the point where with law enforcement's behavior immediately in the immediate aftermath of the obviously tragic murders that occurred there, very frightening again for a small town that doesn't. This isn't the type of thing that's normally obviously occurring in that town. Not, they do have homicides, but, few and far between, it seems, and certainly not quadruple homicides of 4 young adults who were, supposedly sleeping there in their home. So I could see where that would be a frightening experience for the local townsfolk there in Moscow and Pullman as well. But yeah, especially with the way the police handled it, they immediately came out, gave their first press conference on, I believe, on or about November 16th, so 3 days later. And in that press conference, it's really the only press conference that law enforcement truly fielded questions. So within 2 weeks of that press conference, they'd reduced the ability to ask questions at their press conferences down to 0 questions, and from the media. And after that was the Thanksgiving break. After the Thanksgiving break, the Moscow PD, the Idaho State Police, and I believe the local prosecutor's office there in Latah County, where Moscow sits, they all had kind of combined in doing no more independent press conferences or interviews, and combined into one function where they were having only one reporter meet them in an office, and they would be given a list of questions. Well, they would have to provide the list of questions in advance. This is according to some local media outlets that got denied interviews and stuff because it got reduced to one reporter with the police chief, James Fry of Moscow PD, at one time, and again with apparently a scrutinized list of questions.
Moscow PD, how many? What's the population of Moscow?
Moscow, I think, is approximately 40,000 people, and it seems the student population is about, I think, 35 to 40% of that. So you got to think with the folks supporting in the faculty and other employees and support roles of that university, you have to kind of consider that's probably closer to 60% of the entire town is related to that, in some capacity to the university.
Is there a campus PD as well?
That's a good question, Ed. There's not. So they have the campus division of the Moscow PD, and in fact, one interesting note of fact to that department, to that division, the chief or the captain of the campus PD division just retired a few weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4.
Oh, really? No, and the Moscow PD is, how many cops are you looking at there?
I believe approximately 40.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And then they have the Latah County Sheriff's Department there, which is Moscow being the capital seat there, or the county seat. So they have, I believe, approximately the same size road patrol out of the Sheriff's Department. Okay,
so then what is the official story here by the cops?
So it was interesting that the route law enforcement took, as you pointed out. There were 2 surviving roommates in the silent murders that occurred at this house on November 13th. And those 2 roommates have not made any public statements or been seen publicly since. Law enforcement allegedly interviewed both of those roommates, and one of them, and I find this to be one of the most intriguing aspects of and or anomalies of this entire case or investigation, as a individual such as myself looking into the official narrative and affidavits of the investigation and the court filings. You kind of expect the police to focus on both the roommates. But however, looking at all their files and stuff, they've only focused on one roommate, and the entire case is contingent upon only one of the 2 surviving roommates as far as the state's concerned. However, Kohberger's defense has taken the opposite position. So the roommate that's being completely ignored by the state, and they're pretending like she wasn't even there. She's not mentioned in any document, except for alleged one document saying that they did interview her, but she's not listed in the witness statements allegedly testing seeing Kohberger at the scene. That's the roommate, Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate. The other one surviving roommate is Bethany Funk. And now Bethany Funk has been subpoenaed by Bryan Kohberger's defense, seemingly, while the defense hasn't expressly stated that the purpose of that deposition that they seek from Bethany Funk is for exculpatory evidence to, for Bryan Kohberger, the suspect arrested in these crimes. However, that is what has been inferred by the Bryan Kohberger's defense counsel, is that Bethany Funk will have her testimony will yield the results that Bryan Kohberger is innocent.
Okay, well, yeah, there's something unusual about that. Now, what about the two surviving roommates there? Have they retained counsel?
I believe Bethany Funk has, yes, but I'm not sure about Dylan Mortensen. Now, Dylan Mortensen, well, one more note on the initial press conferences I think is interesting with these roommates. The media had a lot of questions. So one of the questions from a local reporter was, were these roommates held hostage? Or they said, were these witnesses? And the Moscow PD said, no, they're not witnesses. And then the next logical question, out of confusion from one of the reporters, was, well, were they hostages? And then they said, Moscow PD said, no, not hostages. Now, this is one instance of numerous instances where Moscow PD makes a public statement such as, no, the surviving roommates were not witnesses, and then later take action that contradicts that statement, where now Dylan Mortensen, the other surviving roommate, is apparently a witness. She's the individual who allegedly witnessed the intruder in her home wearing all black and having bushy eyebrows, and this was largely publicized in media reports to kind of frame suspect Kohberger in the court of public opinion, which there's been a lot of that stuff that has been false, but nonetheless, that's one of the main things that was largely populated through every media outlet was, surviving roommates saw the suspect Kohberger in the home and she identified him by his bushy eyebrows, and that's, I mean, it's a stretch of the imagination kind of in and of itself, the narrative of this roommate seeing this individual, never seeing a knife. As you pointed out, Ed, it was supposedly a silent murder because she didn't hear anything except for someone whispering and a dog barking. But, if she's hearing a whisper and a dog barking, how is she not hearing her three roommates and one of her roommates' boyfriends being brutally murdered in the middle of the night?
They had a dog, huh? Okay.
They had a dog. Had a dog, yep.
All right. Man's best friend, right?
It was a golden doodle, one of those kind of fancy.
Okay, that's not a real dog. Okay. Okay, so then how did the police come about how did Kohberger come to their attention?
That's a great question, and I honestly don't think it's fully been vetted out through any of the public filings and statements and affidavits that have been filed. But I can give you let's start that at the end and walk it backwards to how they got to Kohberger. So on December 30th of 2022, it was, on every media outlet that morning, the Pennsylvania authorities, allegedly along with the FBI, had stormed a house in the early morning hours in the eastern side of Pennsylvania, in the Pocono Mountain area of Pennsylvania. And that was Bryan Kohberger, the suspect in custody and being tried for these crimes. That was his parents' house. He was there on holiday vacation from his professor job. He was a doctoral student, so he was doing TA work and getting his doctorate degree in criminal justice at Washington State University, 5 miles away from Moscow. So he was home on vacation for the holidays, and the Pennsylvania authorities and FBI stormed his home and took him into custody. So that's how he got arrested. Now, he allegedly, how they got tipped off to suspect Kohberger, the authorities in Idaho, that is there was a knife sheath that was allegedly located, and I stress allegedly here simply because no one agrees on precisely where the knife sheath was found, except for it was found in and around two of the victims' bodies in the third floor bedroom of the home in Moscow, Idaho. Now, in their own reports of the authorities in Idaho, there is zero. It's all very ambiguous. There's no clear indication of when this was taken into custody, this piece of evidence, who took it into custody, and then the chain of custody only continues to get even more dubious after those events. But even in the responding officer statements, no one is in clear agreement of when this knife sheath was discovered or where precisely it was discovered. And the DNA evidence allegedly recovered from the snap of the knife sheath is what ultimately led law enforcement to Bryan Kohberger through this genetic DNA investigation that they allegedly conducted, and using the Idaho State Crime Lab, then using who didn't find anything, then going to a third party who may or may not have found any DNA evidence, this private DNA lab out of Texas named Othram Labs. And then they allegedly, because the story has shifted a couple times here in the attempts for the state to remove this evidence from discovery to the defendant and block any access to this information. So then it allegedly went to the FBI, and as the story goes right now, the FBI is the one who located the quote-unquote touch DNA evidence on the snap of the knife sheath.
So the police have the knife sheath. They discovered DNA on the knife sheath, and using various databases, both public and private, they somehow connect that to the family of Kohberger.
Yes, that's correct. So let me close the loop on that one for you. So on the prior to the assault on Kohberger's parents' home in Pennsylvania, an unidentified party, could be the Pennsylvania State Police, could be the FBI. It's not clear at this time. Apparently accessed private property in the gated community, went into the trash can of Bryan Kohberger's parents' trash can at the home, recovered allegedly his father's DNA, and used that as the baseline in their comparison for backtracking to Kohberger. But the ultimate question begins is, how did they get to Kohberger in the first place? And they try, and because I think you can agree with me, the whole we'll get his father's DNA and see if it's not this guy, that's not exactly a manner in which they reasonably got to Kohberger as a suspect, but it is how they allegedly confirmed him as the perpetrator of the crimes.
But wasn't there something too about his car?
Yeah, so that was more the confirmation. So now the ambiguity surrounding the white Elantra, so that's now allegedly how the law enforcement got the suspect Kohberger, and there's great question in regard to that entire piece of their investigation, largely because the authorities, both the Idaho authorities and the FBI, have made conflicting statements on the analysis of the car they were looking for, and just turns out that they weren't even looking for the car that Kohberger had, because the car that the authorities had claimed to be looking for in a press conference on December 7th of 2022, announcing to the public they wanted every tip on this 2011 to 2014 white Hyundai Elantra. So if you're looking for 2011 to 2014 and you're announcing it to the public, you're going to get a lot of tips about that, and they did. They got tens of thousands of tips, apparently. In fact, the FBI had to start a whole new call center to help out, as the story goes. However, that happened on December 7th. Now, after suspect Kohberger was arrested on December 30th, it's easy to go back and look at the arresting affidavits and compare it to the previous actions in the case and the previous public statements. And turns out on November, according to the authorities' filings, on November 27th, I believe, might have been the 28th of 2022, suspect Kohberger was identified as a suspect in this case via his 2015 white Elantra. So if they're identifying him as a suspect on the 28th, according to their statements made after the arrest, however, weeks prior to the arrest, they're asking the public for assistance in locating an Elantra that does not meet the physical or the description of the suspect's vehicle.
And what's the difference in the two Elantras?
Well, it seems that in large part that there's an extra, as a result of some federal legislation requiring daytime running lights, et cetera. There was some vents on the lower kind of front fender of the earlier models than 2015, which is what Kohberger owned. But he had a model that had the daytime running lights instead of the little vent on the front fender. So especially at nighttime with additional set of headlights, it should be pretty clear indicator what making, or at least if you know it's a white Elantra, being the FBI analyst who identified this suspect's vehicle. So that's who according to the authorities' filings and affidavits and documents, it was an FBI analyst who identified the 2011, 2014 white Elantra, which is again what was asked of the public to assist with in the tips on December 7th. However, again, according to the documents, that same analyst then later reanalyzed the same video that helped him determine, no, it was a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra, but that didn't occur until after they arrested Kohberger.
Okay, so the FBI had some kind of video, and they identified this 2015 Elantra, and then...
After the fact, right.
Right.
They initially said it was 2011, 2014. Then they arrest Kohberger, and they said, oh, no, we were wrong. It was a 2015.
Okay. All right. That's not a lot to hang your hat on. They're 1 year off. But okay.
Well,
okay.
I think it's this again. I think the strongest indicator there in the analysis is if it's they're nighttime videos, and one car has 4 headlight lamps on the front end, and the other car has 2. I think it's a clear indicator.
Right. But have you seen that video with this 4 on one and 2 on the other?
No, but I'm saying that's what it should indicate based upon the.
No, it's a good defense investigator. That's what you're hoping, man.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. But
it's
a good question about the video because even Kohberger's defense has not had an opportunity to see the full video used to allegedly identify the car because one of the statements that was made in the defense counsel's recent filings was basically lambasting the state's case up and down, left and right, which, that is their job, so they should be doing that. But one of the statements the defense counsel made was the video that was produced to them in discovery was at the wrong time in the wrong location and clearly did not show the suspect's vehicle. So it seems there's more games being played with access to this alleged evidence that was used to get Bryan Kohberger in the first place, because again, the public statements on their face make no sense why Moscow PD would be asking the public for help. Let's set aside the headlights for a second and table that aspect of it. But 9 days after the fact that they've allegedly already identified their suspect, they're asking for the public's assistance in looking for this suspect in this vehicle. It just doesn't make a lot of sense on its face. It's kind of what I boil that aspect down to of the case.
And when is the trial date?
The trial date is coming up in October as of right now, but they're still hammering out discovery, so I certainly would expect that to be delayed.
And what is the prosecution's defense of this, the wrong video? What's the response to that? Because that happens.
Yeah, they don't. That's a good question. They don't really have a great response. So they just basically keep trying to say that any of this evidence that the defense is seeking is not going to be relevant to the case. That's really what they're trying to hang their hat on. So, for example, the touch DNA evidence from the snap of the knife sheath, their contention with why they don't have to produce any of the names of the labs and the personnel who processed it, their training requirements, that sort of thing, and the background of the individuals who had. Were involved in this chain of custody of this evidence. They claim that none of this is relevant to the defense. None of it's going to be relevant to the prosecution of suspect Kohberger, and as a result, they're not going to use that in the trial. So, I think that is a glaring look inside the weight of that evidence, and again, the validity of that evidence, because that obviously is their key piece of evidence. The nexus point tying Bryan Kohberger, the suspect, to the victims and the crime scene is this knife sheath with this touch DNA evidence. And they can write whatever they want to in a report about white Elantras, but on its face, this is their strongest piece of evidence, compared to any kind of video or alleged.
Right, but the prosecution is saying they're not going to use that evidence.
Yeah, they're saying we don't need it. We have enough evidence without it, and you're not going to ever see that stuff. That's what they're telling the defense, correct?
Okay. All right. Well, if they're not going to use it, they don't have to turn it over.
That's true, and that's what the state continues to do in this back and forth boondoggle of motions for discovery that have been going on for about 3 months. And I do think some of that again, I tend to attribute a lot of that to the state wanting to hide more of this stuff up because, as I assert, Bryan Kohberger is not their guy. I mean, the evidence seems to support that in every regard. And as far as the state doing everything they can to ensure this is never made public, I think the state would have been happy with Bryan Kohberger pleading guilty the moment he stepped off a plane from Pennsylvania, but instead, he did not. In fact, he's remained silent, exercising essentially his Fifth Amendment right since that date. And he does seem to have some defense counsel that seems interested in proper justice in this matter. But in regard to the knife sheath, some more very dubious circumstances surrounding that knife sheath occurred over in Whitman County, Washington, or just across the border where Washington State University is, where Kohberger was a student. Because after his arrest, there was a search warrants, obviously, to go search his office on the campus, his apartment on the campus. And in those search warrants, the Whitman County prosecutor's office told the judge do not pay any attention to this knife sheath or the alleged DNA evidence from the knife sheath because we have probable cause without it. Probable cause to go search the apartment. So for some reason, it seemed that the Whitman County Prosecutor's Office was not big on attaching their name to this alleged DNA evidence in knife sheath in their attempt to obtain a search warrant for the suspect's apartment.
And what about, like, is there an Amazon receipt or any kind of receipt from where he purchased or a witness where he purchased this knife and the knife sheath?
No, but if you're looking at all the filings from the state, they certainly have subpoenaed every retail establishment like Amazon, et cetera. Now, again, back to Whitman County, I just thought of another point there. In the supporting affidavits there from the law enforcement side, the supporting reports on the search warrant, the law enforcement had asserted in Whitman County that they were going to search for a knife sheath and a knife. That's what they claimed their probable cause was, to go search for into Kohberger's apartment. So then it draws into question the prosecutor saying pay no attention. They apparently didn't talk to one another. The prosecutor saying pay no attention to the judge, pay no attention to the knife sheath that we have, and this DNA evidence that was recovered in Idaho. The law enforcement over there in Whitman County saying we need to go look in the apartment. That's for this weapon in the knife sheath. So there's, again, no one seems to agree on the location of when it was entered into evidence, or seems to agree whether or not it even exists.
Oh, okay. Has there been a motion to throw out that search?
Oh, yeah, they've even motioned to throw out the grand jury indictment that came down in May. So there was a public arraignment here. A lot of these things may have been addressed in the public arraignment hearing, right? I think you can agree with me on that, right, Ed?
I wasn't paying attention. What did you say?
I think we can probably agree that a lot of these kind of questions would have been at least drawn to a closer answer during a public arraignment hearing regarding the amount of evidence and what evidence they had against Kohberger, right?
Well, no, that could be preliminary. That could be a cursory information at the arraignment.
No, I'm saying, but there would be more information publicly available as opposed to what's going on right now with all the sealing of everything and then the confidential grand jury indictment, right?
Well, that's interesting. Well, then what's the reason for everything being sealed?
That's what I'm getting at. So there was a public arraignment hearing scheduled in May, right? And just immediately following the end of May, but middle of May, the Kohberger's defense counsel got a subpoena for the deposition of the other surviving roommate, the one that's not mentioned in any of the investigatory documents, and the one that Kohberger's defense claims will exonerate her testimony, will exonerate Bryan Kohberger for these crimes. That occurred, and then immediately following the subpoena for that other roommate, the prosecutor's office there, in conjunction with the Idaho Attorney General's office, because it's a dual prosecution. They got some deputy attorney generals working with the Latah County prosecutor. They decided to have a grand jury nearly 5 months after they arrested the man. So, and again, just a week and a half prior to the scheduled public arraignment hearing. So, yeah, his defense counsel, to answer your question in a long-winded fashion, the defense counsel has motioned to throw out a lot of things, including most recently that grand jury indictment.
Okay. Have they been successful in any of this?
Not really.
Well, and that's not unusual either. It's an uphill battle when you go to trial for your client. It's an uphill battle. Prosecution wins like 90% of the time. What are you going to do? Now, they got all the resources in the works, except for this little tiny police department here. What makes you so suspicious of everything here, Mr. J Vance? Okay? Law enforcement's doing, you're a former law enforcement yourself, okay? Maybe that's why you're so suspicious, okay? But no, they're doing their best job. We have 4 innocent victims here, Mr. Vance. What would you question? They've got the DNA, they've got the sheath, they got the car, it's the same Elantra. What makes you so suspicious about Mr. Kohberger's guilt in this matter? Well,
I'd say that's a great question, and I'd say that it is fair. They have somewhat on the surface built a strong circumstantial case. So at least that's an appearance with, like you said, the DNA evidence and videos of the car, et cetera. However, I think that the entire case is wafer thin. And the moment any one of those areas are under any further scrutiny, any of the areas of the evidence, I think it clearly indicates that there's larger problems here, and that law enforcement did not do an effective investigation, and Kohberger is not their suspect. He did not do it. And, that could be very specific to Kohberger and these alleged phone pings that they assert in their arresting affidavit, that he was being tracked in these phone pings. And I think you have a lot of experience in that.
Yeah, they got phone pings, okay.
Yeah. So the phone pings, from my understanding, is just is indicating that that phone is connecting to one of the towers in this small town that doesn't have but a handful of towers, and then those towers have upwards of at least a 10-mile radius. Is that a pretty rudimentary understanding of how some of that cell phone tracking works?
No, cell phone tracking could be you could track it to as little as 3 yards. Okay. Where the phone, we don't know. Okay, but all that should be turned over to the defense at this point if they're going to use it.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. No, I understand. There is the ability to track as little as 3 yards is present. So I guess I should specify what they've done here. What they've done here is say that the suspect's phone pinged off of these towers near the home, near the murder home in Moscow, Idaho, even though he was living 8 miles, I believe, by roadway away in Pullman, Washington.
He lived there.
He lived there, yeah. So what I'm saying is, if there's a 10-mile radius, then that's from my research and understanding that that phone can connect to a tower 10 miles away, and I think it's actually more. I'm being fairly generous with the minimum of 10-mile radius. So in theory, he could be sitting in his campus apartment in Washington State University, and his phone happens to connect to a tower in Moscow, simply as a result of that tower being overloaded with too many users at one point in time. It'll relay the signal to the next available tower, and if that's the next available tower and he's within the radius, this is kind of how they've tracked him.
But the thing is, have they turned over the discovery on the cell phone tower records?
It doesn't seem to be, no. But a lot of the particulars in the filings are all under seal with just the broad motions being posted online.
Okay. So when they're not going, if they're not going to use it, but what makes you so suspicious? What caused J Vance to wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to take a look at this case. It smells fishy to me"?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was kind of going back to my analysis. Yeah, so that was more of a post-analysis after the report's been published. Just one more quick note on the cell phones. They have him. They even in the own arrest affidavit, they claim he was sitting in his apartment in Washington, while meanwhile his phone was connected to the same tower they tried to use to incriminate him in the same report. So again, there's a lot of stuff in the post-analysis of the arrest that I've drawn that has caused me to those same suspicions that I had early on in the case to seem to be provide some more validity to them. But initially, it was largely the law enforcement response, I think, that really bothered me, because it was, the townsfolk were clearly making a buzz on social media and whatnot as far as the law enforcement's response in the lack of information being available. For example, on the first press conference 3 days after the murders, the law enforcement, the chief of police and the prosecutor, out of Moscow, the Latah County prosecutor and Moscow PD Chief James Fry, both stated that it was an isolated attack. The community should not be worried, but that they had no idea who did it or how it was done or anything else like that. They had no other details. So basically, the ambivalent nature of that statement was probably the first red flag. If they knew it was an isolated attack, if they knew there was no danger to the community, then they would know some information about the crime or have some persons of interest. And they simply did not, and they seem to be continuing down that pathway of being kind of a bumbling small-town police department in appearance to their activities, because, again, they were upsetting the locals and the media so much that they quit doing live press conferences. So those were some of the initial red flags, I think, because the way that was being handled. Granted, there's other aspects. There was an 8-hour gap between the first night, the alleged murders or the alleged murder time. I mean, because the timeline has been shifted by law enforcement as well, and I'll get that in a second, because that was kind of the other major red flag that I noticed during their investigation. So between November 13th and December 30th of 2022, these were the big red flags: the law enforcement's behavior, with the lack of press conferences and the ambivalent nature of their narrative immediately. Right, and then their lack of explanation of the 8-hour gap with the 911 call. So allegedly, the latest time that law enforcement has landed on, the murders occurred on or about, we'll call it 4:25 a.m. at the latest. So between 4 and 4:30 essentially is what they get at in their last timeline. However, the authorities have been forced to change that with third parties bringing up other evidence showing that the initial timeline was incorrect. And we can get into some of those aspects further if you'd like to, Ed. But the broad scope of it is that the timeline has shifted, and as a result of that is that causes the greater scrutiny into the actual events, because it doesn't seem like they're really looking into why there was an 8-hour gap between the surviving roommates
Yeah, that's kind
calling
of
911 and the as you pointed out earlier in the show, the alleged silent murder that occurred in that home that night.
Well, quick question, Kohberger, does he have any kind of previous training or kind of to do this kind of a black ops, a ninja, silent kill kind of operation here? What's this guy's background? I know he's a criminal defense, criminal defense PhD, right?
Yeah, correct. He's had went to I believe a community college out in Pennsylvania and then went to another college, got his bachelor's and got his master's out there in Pennsylvania, and then he got accepted into this PhD program at Washington State University. So he seems like as probably a lot of type of characters you've met over the years in law enforcement, a pretty straight-laced kind of guy who, I don't think he was extremely athletic, but I don't think he was unathletic at the same time from my assessment of any kind of skills and abilities the man may have had. But I think you bring a good point to the matter with this timeline, because to go into a home like that, especially, if you're not familiar with the layout, the contents of the people in the home, when you see 5 vehicles parked out front, you may not know what's going on inside. So it would really take a highly skilled assassin, as you kind of black ops kind of guy, to go in there, murder 4 people in a silent manner. Yeah. The dog. Yeah. And the dog doesn't really alert anybody during the time and seemingly doesn't attack the perpetrators, and then leave there and leave a scene that is basically without any evidence. And I would actually leave a scene, according to the authorities' own evidence that they've produced, the scene was cleaned up after the crime.
What do we know about? I was sent a bunch of material on this, okay, by a former guest who's an attorney who's currently in exile out of the country, and who's just done some research. Yeah, just done some research. Well, I'll tell you who it is: the underwear bomber guy, the witness in the underwear bomber case.
Oh, I remember that. I rember that story. Yeah,
Haskell, right? Right. Kurt Richard Haskell.
The witness, the guy at the airport. Okay.
Kurt Richard Haskell.
Nice.
Yeah, I know, but listen, he gets a little out there sometimes. Okay, but
well, I mean, it happens.
But the work he's done on this, he sends, it didn't come directly from him, but through a third party, and he's done all this research on the landlord, and that he has information that Kohberger had visited other properties owned by this landlord. Do you know anything about that?
No, but I mean, I would certainly be interested to see that, because, I know a lot of allegations get thrown towards Kohberger that, he's a serial killer, he's a cannibal, all this other stuff that the media's reported, and I think it's generated a lot of other activities, but I'm not saying that Kohberger's not into weird stuff or criminal activities. He certainly could be. What about allegations that this was a drug stash house? I think there's a lot to that storyline based upon the statements of the townsfolk, other college students within the Greek fraternity and sorority culture there, and according to the own law enforcement documents of both cities of Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, there has been a ongoing, and I would say long-going for at least the past documented for the past decade at least, culture of drug trafficking amongst those Greek students, the Greek community students, the fraternity and sorority members on both of those campuses. It's not an outlying event. It's not a one-off. It seems to be an accepted culture amongst those Greek students there in large-scale drug trafficking. And when I say large-scale, for example, one of the fraternities back in 2018 or 2019 over in Pullman, Washington, the Washington State campus, they were busted with a pill stamping machine, and was apparently, according to the Regional Drug Task Force, one of the largest pill stamping operations in Washington State history. And they were shipping the Xanax pills they were stamping all the way to at least as far as Seattle, which, that's 4 hours by road. So, I mean, it was a pretty substantial operation. And again, that's not a one-off either. So there's numerous incidents. That's obviously seemingly the worst case scenario, But these frat houses, they are a source of drug use, obviously, but also to drug purchasing, distribution. And then you have the alumni. They become attorneys. They become chief of police. They become prosecutors. So there is a network of these characters, all with secrets in their past. All kinds of stuff there, all kinds of wonderful stuff going on there. Okay, so you've heard this stuff too about the possible drug stash house. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems to have some validity to it. What are your thoughts?
When I looked at the material sent over to me by Haskell, what about the landlord? Have you looked into the landlord of this property?
Briefly. I would be interested to see more. I just didn't. There was nothing that I came across that seemed to draw any kind of red flags. But certainly the drug stuff. Again, there was specifically relative to the social circle of the victims. An individual who was in the social circle of the victims, a fraternity president from the University of Idaho, died of I believe a fentanyl-laced cocaine drug overdose back in March of this year, March of 2023, and he actually OD'd in Seattle and died. Got out of the hospital there and died a couple hours later in a town about an hour and a half east of Seattle. And the individuals arrested for providing him drugs was a girl that was immediately in the social circle of the victims of this Idaho quadruple homicide. So again, it seems to be that this there is a much larger drug culture amongst the quote unquote secret societies of these fraternities and sororities there. And you make a good point about the national chapters and some of the protocols I find interesting here is within how these organizations operate is these national chapters tell the local chapters of universities how to operate in the event of an issue or emergency. For example, if there was somebody who got a overdose or alcohol poisoning on at one of the sorority or fraternity houses, they're supposed to call the national chapter first, not any police or parents, and then the national chapter handles it, and they probably handle it through these attorneys that used to be part of these organizations. As you pointed out, Ed, there's a lot of that activity that goes on. So, to a certain degree, the 8-hour gap in time could be somewhat attributed to that policy, although this home was not on campus and it was not an actual sorority house. It was just a home, that was populated by sorority girls. So, and then one fraternity guy that is over visiting his girlfriend. So, there's definitely a blanket of secrecy already dealing with these organizations. They have policies like this to add more ambiguity to what happened in the immediate aftermath. However, I think the 8-hour timeline is of not calling 911 in a home where 4 people were brutally murdered in, allegedly a silent fashion because, again, no one heard anything apparently. But I think that is one of the biggest gaping holes in this entire investigation, and one police have simply ignored and not really cared to dive further into, it seems.
Now the Kohberger defense, he has a public defender.
Correct. He has two public defenders. Yep.
Okay. And how did he make a living before this?
It seems that he was basically a professional student, but he did have some security guard jobs, I believe, at the local school district back in where he's from in Pennsylvania. I believe his mother was a teacher in that district, and he was at one point in time employed as a security guard there. But in large part, it looks like he's been a professional college student for the last 5 or 6 years for the most part.
Okay, and the mother was employed at the college. What about his father?
I mean, his parents seem to be of upper middle class. I don't recall his father's exact profession, but I did look at some of the family's activities, and they, on their, to me they seem like a normal folk. Not a family of serial killers or anything. As often as getting reported that Bryan Kohberger is some serial killer monster, but. My point on that topic is, why don't we start with the Idaho case? Did he do that one? And if he didn't, then we can probably drop all the rest. Then what are the
allegations? I've never heard any allegations of serial killing. What would be the other occasions?
Oh, I mean, the interwebs. The folks of the interwebs come up with all sorts of ideas, don't they, Ed? I mean, they one of his, I believe, is how it goes. Some of those theories. One of his professors that he had at grad school in criminal justice out at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. Yeah. She apparently wrote a book on the BTK killer, I believe.
Okay.
And it's obviously the folks of the interwebs claim that that Kohberger's like Ted Bundy, and he intentionally sought out a professor who wrote a book on the BTK killer. And again, I just think a lot of this stuff is just kind of ridiculous at times. And I try to look at what law enforcement is even to do to incriminate Kohberger in this case, in the Idaho case, and again, they've not done a great job, and I think they're well aware of it.
Real quick, who was the professor who wrote that book on BTK?
Oh, that's a great question.
Have you ever seen those pictures in the BTK case?
No, it's a strange case. Most of my knowledge comes from Dave McGowan's book,
right. Program to Kill.
Thank you, Ed.
But the thing is,
I was drawing a blank.
Yeah, I got an autographed copy.
Nice.
What do you call it? Because, what was that guy's name in BTK real quick? Remember?
Dennis Rader?
Right. He has pictures of himself, Polaroids of himself tied up. He has pictures of himself buried up to his neck. How did he? And that's saying he took the pictures himself. Very, very strange case here at BTK. I wonder who the professor was, because I interviewed a bunch of people on that. Some people try and explain it away. And there's definitely other murders he was involved in that he's gotten away. We only got about 2 minutes left. Mr. J Vance, you can find him at OperationGCD.com. And the podcast is called Operation GCD. You can find him on Twitter at Operation GCD. What do you want to leave us with?
Oh, well, Ed, I appreciate the time. Thanks for the invite. I think I can leave you with, even suspect Kohberger's got rights, and it seems like if law enforcement authorities in Idaho and Washington have a case against the man, they need to quit stealing stuff. They need to quit denying the man discovery, and if he's legitimately the perpetrator of these crimes, then they've done a good job. If not, they need to go back out and provide justice for these victims.
Hey, what do we know about the prosecutor down there? Do they have a history of being difficult with and overly aggressive with sharing discovery and stuff like that?
It doesn't seem to be, but they do have a history of some other strange murders and even murders of children of the law enforcement departments there that have never been solved. So, there's an odd culture there in that town, and I think it has a deep historical roots. And I'm kind of going to be covering some of that in a future podcast on the topic, some of the occult history of that town. Murders
of children of law enforcement.
Correct.
Okay, and you believe there's an occult connection to that?
Well, I think just generally speaking, the town was founded by occultists, some folks with an astrotheological philosophy.
Who?
They named themselves the Pleiades Club.
Okay. And what about, real quick?
That's who started the university as well. They were the spouses of the founder and other faculty.
Oh, really? Very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, there was a New Thought cult that operated there as their headquarters too. That seemed to have some strange power, political power, social power, called the Psychiana cult.
Any indications of any of the people in the home or Kohberger himself being a police informant?
I've often asked that, and there's not any clear indications, but there's certainly when you're dealing with this much drug activity, those police informants do seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah. And cover up. J Vance, OperationGCD.com. You can find him on Twitter at OperationGCD. How often do you put out content for your podcast?
I do it at least every 2 weeks, but I generally aim for more like every week. But yeah, I'd love to, any folks want to come over and listen or interact with me. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and like I said, producing content at least every couple of weeks there on Operation GCD.
But not on a regular schedule. It doesn't come out on a specific day or time.
I aim for every Friday, but yeah, it's at least every other Friday at the worst.
So follow him on Twitter, Operation GCD, and check his aim for when the shows will come out. Hey, J Vance, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
Good night.